The IMF is warning that the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on Asian economies will be severe and unprecedented. It also says the slowdown will be worse than the 2008 global financial crisis and the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Experts say it's due to its sheer scale.
The IMF said it's going to cause the biggest recession since the global depression in the 1930s. It's the scale. Countries are shutting down. Whole towns, the shops are closed. People aren't going out. I think it's obvious. It's just the economies are being closed down. So it's going to be the biggest probable crisis of our lifetimes.
In particular, the region's services sector, which includes restaurants and shops, has been hit hard due to social distancing measures. There's also a slump in demand for exports by key trading partners, such as the US and European countries. The IMF says Asia's two biggest economies will suffer big drops in growth. China's GDP is forecast to expand by 1.2% this year, down from 6% growth in the IMF's January forecast. India is expected to grow by nearly 2%, down from a previous forecast of 5.8%. They're among just a few of the region's economies expected to grow. Japan's GDP will likely contract by around 5% this year, and Australia's by almost 7%. But the IMF has praised some Asian countries for their handling of COVID-19.
What we hope to see is not only effective use of all the instruments of monetary policy and fiscal policy in Asia, but us learning from Asia on containment strategies, how they are being implemented, so the rest of the world would benefit from the experience Asia is accumulating.
The IMF is urging Asian governments to do more to restore growth and prevent further job losses. But the fund adds that despite its troubles, the region is expected to do better than Europe and the US, and that it will rebound strongly next year if the coronavirus outbreak is brought under control. Shamim Chowdhury, TRT World.
Well, for more, let's go to Anna Ashton in Washington, D.C. She's the Director of Business Advisory Services at the US-China Business Council. Welcome back to Money Talks, Anna. Now, as we know, Asia has been really one of the world's economic growth engines. It's among the fastest growing regions in the world. Even during the last two financial crises, the region managed to avoid slipping into recession. What makes this crisis different then?
Well, I think there are a number of factors, but the primary factors are the fact that, this is hitting every economy in the world almost at the same time, and it's shutting down every single sector. I think it was Geeta Gopinath, the IMF's chief economist, who said that this economic crisis is one that's not really controlled by economic policy, and it's not. It's really being driven by public health responses that are necessary but severe. And we don't yet know when those public health responses can reasonably be expected to relax globally.
Now, the region's largest economies, China and India, have long propped up the average growth rate across Asia. What does the IMF say about those two emerging economies during this crisis?
Well, both of them are still expected to grow a little bit, but certainly far from what was the previous projected growth rate. And I think a lot of that is because of the fact that we are in a global economy, we're interdependent, and the manufacturing sectors in those countries depend on the consumer sectors here. And the United States is expected to see a pretty significant economic contraction, as is the EU. So with people on our side of the world not being able to buy what people on their side of the world are making, their growth is necessarily going to be inhibited.
And you keep a close eye on what happens in China. How do you think the government there has dealt with the economic fallout of this crisis?
Well, I think that they've done, the best that they can. I think everybody everywhere is kind of stumbling through this, but it seems to me that China made a decision early on to take drastic measures at the outset of the epidemic in order to try to prevent the epidemic from becoming too severe or too widespread. And they took a really significant economic hit in January and February that I think they were hoping would allow them to recover for the rest of the year. If they could contain the virus then, perhaps the overall economic damage for 2020 would be mitigated. So far, I think that bet is paying off. I think that, we see their manufacturing beginning to recover. The problem now is that the pandemic is everywhere else.
Sure is. Now, the IMF expects more advanced economies in the region to suffer even more. It says Japan's economy will contract by around 5%, Australia's by almost 7%. Why is it then that advanced economies are going to fare worse than their emerging counterparts?
Well, I'm not an economist, so I can't give you, a perfect answer, but my guess would be it's interesting to look at the Japanese numbers and the Australian numbers because the U.S. Expected contraction is about on par with that for Japan, and the EU's expected contraction is about on par with that of Australia. All of these economies generally have in common that they are services-driven economies. And of course, when you have a great lockdown, as the IMF is calling it right now, where people can't go out, can't spend money, can't eat at restaurants, can't go to movies or bars, then all of those services jobs are not being done, money's not being made, and it's not being put back in.
Okay, Anna Ashton from the US-China Business Council, thank you for your analysis as always.